Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Responsibility Quotient podcast. My name is Katherine Kowalchuk, and I'm glad you're tuning in today. We have a special broadcast today. I have two of my most favorite people joining us, and we're going to talk a little bit about, or a lot about, the state of our Law Society of Alberta and our judiciary, and why, or maybe explain why we're having such difficulties getting positive decisions, and how our current societal structure and culture is impacting lawyers in this province, the Law Society of Alberta, and our judiciary. So without further ado, I'm going to bring on Lani Roulliard and Doris Reimer. Both of these ladies are lawyers in the province of Alberta, and I had the pleasure of getting to know them and becoming good friends with both of these women who we met during COVID, and we've all started Lawyers for Truth together. And I can tell you that it was both of these ladies were pillars of strength for me while we were going through COVID and trying to navigate the ever-changing landscape and the laws. But there has been some fallout as a result of the COVID lockdowns and some of the stuff that we were doing during COVID, including providing mask exemptions, legal mask exemptions to the public, and to which were designed to help people assert their rights and freedoms in resisting what we believed, and I think I can say this on behalf of you guys, the tyranny that we were experiencing in our province and in our country. And that provided a lot of relief to a lot of people. And we made good friends and contacts all over Canada and within Alberta. But the saga continues, and most of this has been targeted on Doris, and Doris was the lawyer who was providing these legal mask exemptions. And as a result of her advocacy on behalf of Albertans, complaints were made to the Law Society of Alberta. And what is it, 3 years later now, Doris, you're still dealing with it, and it's still not done. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Doris. Lani is actually representing Doris right now with the Law Society complaints that originated. Well, I'll let Doris and Lani get into where they originated from. But Doris, tell us what happened. Tell us what's going on with the Law Society of Alberta.
Well, hey, Katherine and Lani. And Katherine, thanks for having me and Lani on today. Yeah, I can't believe it's been 3 years since you and I were pounding the pavement, walking down Kensington, trying to educate business owners about, their obligations in terms of masking and lockdowns and that kind of thing. The reception was not so well received in some cases, but anyway, here we are.
I call it Ken's Wokington.
Ken's Wokington. Yep. And then, of course, Lani joining us shortly thereafter, which was amazing. So, so back in late 2020 or early 2021.
Oh, we lost you, Doris.
Am I back?
Oh, there you are. Sorry. Yeah, sorry. It might have been me. Sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, good. So early 2021, we started, with Lawyers for Truth. We were volunteers for Lawyers for Truth, and we decided to sort of open up a portal for the public who is quite eager to understand what their rights were with masking. And we, were able to, get appointments in and that kind of thing, and talk to them and advise them. And most of it was really around like things like informed consent, the right to have informed consent, because the mask was a medical device that was used to supposedly prevent the spread of a virus. It was the Alberta Human Rights Act that I advised them on. I advised them on the Charter and our rights to bodily autonomy, and then also their privacy rights. So those were kind of the main sort of things that we were advising men and women of Alberta mostly, but outside of Alberta as well. on, and they were very appreciative of the efforts of Lawyers for Truth. And I talked to so many individuals that had, really serious medical conditions that prevented them from wearing a mask. Some of them were like PTSD. I remember talking to a woman who had actually been held at gunpoint by a masked man, and it was severely traumatic for her. I had someone with like cancer, like throat cancer, and sort of the dryness of their mouth, and how masking really affected him. I mean, I just had such a wide array of sort of issues that people were dealing with, and so I was quite privileged to be able to, advise them that they had a right to not wear a mask. And the other thing was religious exemptions and that kind of thing. So, needless to say, Lawyers for Truth, we sort of came up with a way of informing people, and then also providing them with letters. And we did it also in a card format, which had their picture in the corner. Well, I mean, the cards varied from time to time, but anyway, the gist of it was that they were exempt from wearing a mask, including under the Public Health Act, and that if anybody who violated their right, they could be held liable, and that their reasons for not masking was private and confidential. So that was the gist of what these mask exemptions were like. So May 2021 is the first time that the Law Society wrote me a letter. And the gist of the letter was, what is your authority to provide mask exemptions? Well, as lawyers, we are allowed to advocate for our clients, and our loyalty is also to our clients. And secondly, even in the beginning, so if you remember the CMH orders that came down from the public health officer, they had kind of later on, it was something about like you had to be either a medical practitioner or a nurse practitioner, something like that, or a doctor that could issue these exemptions. But that wasn't the only.
But you weren't providing medical exemptions.
No, I wasn't. But that was the question. They're like, what authority do you have? And I actually didn't even know what they meant. I was like, well, I'm a lawyer and I'm allowed to advocate, right? And it's actually my duty to advocate. So anyways, I responded to them and I said, look, I said, what did I say? I said, like, first of all, I've spent many pro bono hours understanding the charter. The charter is not something that I ever dealt with in my practice. It was kind of like COVID hit, and I was like,
Yeah.
I think I need to pull that book off the shelf and actually.
We all did.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
right? The charter, Alberta Human Rights Act, all that kind of thing, right? So I spent numerous and I know you did too, numerous pro bono hours educating ourselves on this, and then being able to properly advise our clients. So, and doing pro bono work is one of the things that the Law Society has always encouraged us to do as lawyers, right? So the messaging that the Law Society has to the public is that, they're there to protect the public from, maybe unscrupulous lawyers or careless lawyers. Like, they hold us to a certain standard of practice, and they make sure that we have rules that govern our trust accounting so that we're not stealing from our clients. So that's the real sort of crux of what the Law Society is there for. And I think people, when they're hiring a lawyer, they feel comfortable that we are governed by a governing body, and that, there's some protection for them if their lawyer, screws up or
Acts unethically.
Yeah. So that's what they're there for. But somehow they've now sort of come in and dictated what we can and cannot do in terms of our practice, what we do for advocacy. Like, they did it really quite, they didn't come out really and say, you can't do this or you can't do that. It was just more, they almost set it by example. Like, the Law Society had a vaccine mandate for their employees. And in fact, I went into the Law Society in the course of this complaint. I went into the Law Society at one point, into their offices, and it was after the vax mandates had been lifted for everyone else. Like, nobody was asking for a vax pass anymore to get into a restaurant. But I go into the Law Society office. The first thing they ask me is for my vaccine passport. So they kind of set it by example, right? Like, you knew as a lawyer, like, you don't want to speak out against this kind of stuff because you knew what side they were on. And Catherine, as well, like with the courthouse I think they were the first ones to come out with the masking policy in 2020 even before any mandates. So
Yeah, exactly. They did. Yeah.
so that's kind of how they communicated to us, as to what we should or shouldn't be involved in. But regardless, kind of soldiered on. And so when I responded to the Law Society in the middle of 2021, I didn't hear from them for another 6 months. It wasn't until sort of, I think, December that I got the next email from an investigator, and he was demanding to interview me. So, a few months later, he interviewed me for about an hour. And then he wanted
Doris, can I just interrupt for a second?
Yeah, sure.
At this stage, had there been a complaint about you?
No. So not that I knew of. So I asked the question. I'm like, has one of my clients complained? Have you received a complaint? And they refused to provide me with that answer. So this investigation or questioning was instigated by the Law Society itself. It wasn't as a result of any complaint that I knew of. Now, fast forward, just a few months ago, or in the fall, I think, whenever they sent the disclosure, Lani, I don't remember when that was, but
Yep.
now that I have the disclosure, there was a number of complaints. Like some of them are nameless. They didn't disclose the names of the complainants, and none of them were none of them were
none of the complaints were your clients.
no, like it would be like a Saskatchewan doctor complained because their patients came into the office and demanded or wouldn't mask or something like that, and then ended up asking for their records. So that kind of stuff, like I said, it only came out very recently. They wouldn't disclose it for a long time at the beginning, even though I was asking what's
right. So here you are, you receive a letter of inquiry from the Law Society and you respond, you don't hear from them until December of 2021, in and about that time period.
Yeah.
And the next communication is from an investigator. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay.
And then I got legal counsel because it was quite a threatening letter. It was, you're entitled to legal counsel, links to the discipline process, but it was very kind of vague. Like I was like, okay, I know that I'm entitled to know what I breached, right? Which of my
Wait, what rule?
or what ethical obligation have I breached here? Because the Law Society, it's not incumbent upon them to decide whether I'm right or wrong. Like, when you've got two lawyers on the side of an issue, one lawyer is always going to be wrong, or when one's going to win, one's going to lose. Like, that's not their job, is to say, oh, you're providing bad legal advice. And not that I was, I'm not saying that I was, but I'm just saying, like, that's not what they're there for. They're there to make sure that we are practicing to a certain standard, right? So anyway, I was asking them which of my obligations have I breached. They wouldn't answer it. In fact, they still haven't answered it. So I don't think they can answer it, actually. Do you think, Lani?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Well, just to before you jump in, Lani, so as lawyers, we're governed by a code of conduct. We're governed by the rules of the Law Society and the Legal Professions Act. And so at this stage, Doris, you have no idea what part of any of those three governing documents that you've breached or are alleged to be in violation.
That's correct. And the other thing is, and then what happened in I think May of 2022, they started demanding all of my client files. So in my interview, they asked, like, how many, these exemptions letters have you done? And anyway, and then they were demanding like all of my client files. And I'm like, well, first of all, it's confidential. Like, what right do you have to it? If it had been one of my clients who complained, I can totally see it. But, none of my clients had complaints. So I wasn't about to provide them with any list or anything like that. So I refused to do it. And so they kept badgering me about that. And then finally in 2022, in the summertime, that's when I went to the Law Society office. Because I was like, look, sorry, go back. My first counsel actually had to resign due to a conflict. So I was without counsel now for a while. And then I said to them, like, look, I'll just come and have a chit chat with you. Okay. Like, how about if I come to the office and let's just, talk about this, because I really don't know what it is you're after. It's all very vague. And so then they were resistant, right? Like, they didn't want to see me in person. And that's a big thing too, is because, they're trying to cancel me out, but they don't want to actually face me. Right. But anyway, I
Yeah.
insisted that I come by, and eventually one of them agreed to meet with me. I think the other was on holidays, but he was insisting on recording it. And anyway, and then he didn't record it, and it turned out to be okay, because we actually had a bit of a conversation. And then after that, he kind of disappeared. I think I had one email from him after that, and then
But during this time too, weren't you told that you weren't being investigated?
I was always told I was not being investigated.
Yeah.
I've never been told that I'm under investigation. And I had 2 investigators after me, and they would contact me directly, even when I had counsel, which is totally offside. So very harassing for me to be getting these like demands and harassing and threatening, communications from these investigators of the Law Society.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that kind of went on for a while. And then I had a second lawyer from Ontario, because I was actually having trouble finding somebody in Alberta, because Alberta lawyers are generally conflicted out, right? So unless you're kind of willing to, um, risk getting pursued by them as well, I'm not going to have a fair representation here. So had an Ontario lawyer for a while, and then they would like just again circumvent the lawyer and communicate with me directly. So again, there was kind of a long period of time where they didn't communicate, and all of a sudden, they left my Ontario lawyer out in the dust, and they were like back at me directly, right? So breaching all their own rules. Like, I can find the rule that says like that they have to do this, they have to let me know if I'm being investigated, they have like that kind of thing. Then in the fall of 2023, so just a few months ago, they've now sent it to conduct counsel and now directed it to a hearing. And then part of the process there is they have these pre-hearings. So it's kind of, I think, supposed to be procedural. It's very vague, even what that is. And we had Lani appeared at all 3 pre-hearings, and that was quite the show.
Adventure, yeah.
Yeah, because what's happened is they have now taken it to the next level, and they haven't provided the Section 59 notice, which is required by the Legal Profession Act.
And what's that?
So it's a notice. So when this moves forward at the Law Society, the executive director of the Law Society is supposed to issue a notice, and it's supposed to indicate what the particulars of the complaint are, like what it is that I've done wrong, and what the sanctions are that are being sought, so that I know what this is about, right, and can move forward. It has none of that. I don't have a Section 59 notice. I still don't know what sanction they're looking for. Are they looking to disbar me? Are they looking to suspend me?
It's also supposed to be signed by the executive director,
It
so
is.
that it's authorized by the Law Society, right?
Exactly. So Lani's done a fantastic job of really hammering that point home, but they just seem to think that the executive director could delegate it, which that is also an important piece for the public to know, because as we saw throughout COVID, the higher ups will never get involved. They get the underlings to do all their dirty work, right? And so I sense that, the executive director doesn't want to put her name to this, because I feel it's quite underhanded, right? And so, and I know that this is a process that the Law Society has followed for a long time. In fact, in one of the pre-hearings, they made a point, well, we always do it like this. We always do it. Well, it's like, it doesn't matter if you did it 1,000 times before. Like, you're circumventing the law, right?
Mhm.
So I think this is probably one of the first times they're being taken to task on that, because the executive director's delegated her obligation, and it's only in the policy that says that she can delegate, but there have to be specific circumstances in order for her to do that, and we don't even know that. Is that correct, Lani?
Yes,
Correct
yes.
description?
But really what happens here is that, I guess to break it down for the viewers, is that legislation empowers us, right? So if you have a right to something or a right to do something, it starts with the piece of legislation. So the thing is that right now, what's happening is all of these policies about pre-hearing conferences and virtual conferences and all these different things are being thrown out there. And again, this policy is being used to avoid what the legislation tells you you must do. So, in order to trigger a hearing, the Law Society, the Conduct Committee, actually needs to get a signed Section 59 notice from the Executive Director. And the function of that is to make sure that, number one, the Law Society is aware of what's happening here. And number two, to make sure that Doris has a clear understanding of the allegations against her, because
Yeah.
we're in a democracy, right? You're supposed to know the case against you. So what we need to keep in mind, it's kind of no different than the COVID mandates. They write a policy that goes around the law
Yeah,
and then point at the law and say, no, that's you don't understand. But I guess the issue is too, is that, okay, if we're not clear on this, then does that mean the Law Society doesn't authorize anything? Like what are our benchers for? What is the board there for? What does the executive director do if it just runs on policy and staff and conduct committees and there's no sense of review, there's no system of checks and balances? I just want to chisel in on one thing with Doris, is that let's look at the big picture here, because we say 3 years, but that is 3 years of paying lawyers to defend your ability to earn a living. Like, what kind of
Yeah.
stress is that to carry for 3 years? And then to kind of get into the process and be told that you're not entitled to the notice that sets out in crystal clear terms from the executive director of the Law Society what exactly it is that you've done wrong. So this is where it gets really, this is her livelihood, right?
Yes,
exactly.
and this is
Yeah.
part of
And
the what I think people are really experiencing with especially with these professional complaints from these professional bodies across many disciplines, and even our courts, right, and the government. They recognize that the punishment is the process. They
Mhm.
don't have
yeah,
any actual regard for how this is affecting you. And it's not that they like I'm not like I'm not naive. Like, I understand that the Law Society does have their role and a proper procedure, but clearly here they're not following the proper procedure in how they've dealt with Doris. I mean, we've known about this for 3 years, and I know that that they refuse to be transparent about about this process at all, and this is the punishment. But it gets worse because Doris is now going to a hearing to deal with. Well, you can explain, Doris. What are you
right.
going for a hearing for, and explain the length of this hearing?
Okay, well, that's the other point. So it's now scheduled for a 2-week hearing in October. And I'm going like, I've never denied that I authored these letters, right? On my letterhead. I've never ever said that I was a medical practitioner, which seems to be the gist of what they're coming after me for, which is absolutely insane, quite frankly. So yeah, a 2-week hearing for something where the facts aren't even an issue. So it's completely nonsensical. And again, no regard for the amount of time that it takes, like the amount of money that takes, or anything like that. And the other point I wanted to make was the Law Society they put out their objectives. And in their objectives, they pride themselves on being independent. Well, they're clearly not independent. Um,
Yeah.
you know,
Independent from who? The government? Is that what you're saying?
independent from the
Mhm.
government.
Yeah.
hmm
Mhm.
Because yeah, they're essentially perpetuating the government narrative and not allowing lawyers to come out against that narrative, right? So we get
Well, and
punished.
seriously, like the exemptions that you were giving were literally reciting sections of the charter, sections of the Human Rights Code,
Mhm.
and saying, look, you know, and a notice of liability that if you shop owner, you whoever the card or letter was presented to, you could be held liable. And you know, it's not uncommon for lawyers when they're representing their clients to threaten liability. Like,
I think
I
every
mean,
lawyer would be disbarred or suspended if that was the case. 'Cause, like, yeah, that's what we do, right? And
that's
But
what
there's
we do.
but there's an elephant in the room, though. This is the law. And
Oh,
what bothers me is that we all took an oath to uphold the rule of law. How are we ignoring the fact that the law is parked right over there and everybody's ignoring it?
yeah.
You know, it just doesn't make sense. It's like we're
Well,
talking around it too, you know? Yeah.
yeah, and so now you have a 2-week hearing, and these aren't, like, is it going to be in person, or are these all
Oh
online
no, oh
now?
no, they don't want to deal with me in person or Lani. No, no, no. Like they are insisting it's on Zoom. And it's like it's so easy to cancel somebody when it's just on video conference, isn't it? Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, and that's the a point to make is that they can't look you in the eye when they're doing it, right?
Would you want a Zoom call to end your career? Is that fair?
Well,
You
exactly.
know, look at the gravity of it too.
Exactly.
So
Yeah, well, we
we
don't even, and we don't even know what the sanctions could possibly be, because we don't
No.
really know, you know, what, you know, you had these complaints, but exactly as a result of these complaints that did materialize eventually, exactly how you failed to uphold your professional obligations.
Right. And I hired like the best lawyer I could find. But at the same time, if they were only looking to maybe find me $1,000 or something, I might have got someone who is a little bit more mediocre, right? Like I need to know, are you looking to disbar me? Are you like, what are you looking for? Like that is important for me to know, even in terms of like who I'm going to hire.
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly. So when's the hearing?
I don't recall the exact
I
dates,
think
but I
it's
think it's the first,
October. Yeah.
yeah, the first 2 weeks of October, I think,
Yep.
is what it's set for.
So everybody and lawyers out there, if you're listening to this and wondering why our professional association fees go up year after year, it's because you have these trusted lawyers in the Law Society conducting these sorts of investigations against lawyers in Alberta who are just trying to advocate for their clients. So, I mean, this is kind of where we're at. It's no surprise we're seeing this sort of persecution with most professional bodies across the country. Of course, Jordan Peterson is the most famous representation of that, but we have obviously the College of Physicians and Surgeons in Alberta who've been canceling and firing doctors, etc. So they're really challenging times, right? And now, we have Bill C-63 that's come out. And I'm sure the audience will know what Bill C-63 is, but it's, dubbed summarized as an Online Harms Act. But within this omnibus legislation, the Liberal government is feeling that it's necessary to change the criminal code and expand not only the definitions, but the sanctions with respect to hate speech, right?
Without
And
defining it. Yeah,
Mhm.
what it
yeah,
is,
without
right?
defining it, and
Yeah.
creating this whole new bureaucracy outside of the court of law. Not that the courts have behaved or are behaving much differently, but setting up a tribunal system where these people who are so excited about trying to protect children from online porn, which of course we all agree with. Of course we would all agree with that. I mean, a simple solution to that would be just to not have online porn, but we can't do that in our society. So we have to, of course, punish people because obviously people abuse the privilege of freedom from from time and time again, but it's not protecting children. It's actually going to make things worse. And we're going to have this bureaucracy, another bureaucracy that is going to make these decisions and define what hate speech is and define what is inappropriate on the internet, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we've definitely moved into, another chapter of this Orwellian hellscape that we find ourselves in these days. And it feels like, at every turn, we have governments on both provincially and federally that are throwing these things out. It's like a fire hose of tyranny that we're experiencing right now, trying to drink from a fire hose. And every day we're seeing another affront against rights and freedoms, against all people in Canada.
But
So
a big part of this is going to the root of somebody's reputation. And I think
of
that needs
course,
to be pointed out to the public as well, because I think that when a professional does not align with the narrative politically, that's when, like, and I think Jordan Peterson is the perfect example, but that is exactly when they're going to try to cut you down. They're going to try to bring ethical violations. They're going to try to spin it. And this is the issue that I have, because I think the public needs to understand too, they are actually out there weeding the garden right now. And what that means is that later on, if you have a certain issue and you try to go and get resolution for that with the right professional, you may not find there are any doors opening for you. And I have already had clients say that to me, like about certain
yeah.
issues they come in with, and I don't see that as our role as professionals. And I'm just speaking generally. We need professionals of all different scopes and skill levels and skill sets, because that's what diversity looks like, is multiple different types of needs in our society. So if we're going to paint it all with one landscape, I think the public is going to wake up one day and they're going to be very disappointed, whether it's their doctor or their accountant or their lawyer. And because I've seen this, and I think we all have, from all of the governing bodies pretty much, putting us in line and saying this is appropriate to say, this is not appropriate to say. And I just want to say something too in Doris's defense, because I'm a severe asthmatic myself. And I want to say that a lot of the time, people, as soon as I said I had an exemption letter, they didn't want it. They didn't even look at it. They threw me out anyways. So
Yeah.
this is why I go on to about the rule of law as well, because it's just really, they're weeding the garden. They're taking out people that don't align with those
Well,
ideologies.
and they wonder why, and some people wonder why they can't find a lawyer, to your point, right? So many people struggle to find a lawyer that would take some of their cases. I mean, I ran a few cases in family law regarding a parent not wanting their child to have the jab, and but many people wouldn't even touch those sorts of issues. Many lawyers wouldn't touch those issues, but it's not because, and some of them I know for a fact didn't do it because they didn't want to be seen as opposing what was happening, because they know. And I mean, we can get into a little bit, like, the big firm mentality. I mean, I worked in a big firm for some of my career, and I've been practicing for over 20 years. And, there is a pressure, and we know this, because we hear it from our colleagues in these big firms who have bought the government narrative hook, line, and sinker. And they are very persuasive, let's just say, with their staff and their lawyers to comply with whatever it is they are supposed to comply with. And that was a big, and that's why you saw many of the lawyers who stood up during COVID were either sole practitioners or mostly, or had their own law firm, so that they could go out and do that sort of representation. And so this has had a chilling effect on on everybody, and including our profession. And I think this was really shown clearly to me when Lani and Doris were part of a petition that was going around in 2021 with respect to the Law Society giving themselves the authority outside of the Legal Profession Act to create cultural competency training. And if we didn't complete the cultural competency training, we were not going to be able to practice law. And so a group of us lawyers, Doris and Lani included, signed a petition to call a special general meeting of the Law Society. I guess that happened in 2022. January of 2022, and or was it 2023? 2023, January 2023, and because we brought a motion to repeal the rule that the Law Society had granted themselves, and what we believe to be in violation of the Legal Profession Act. And what I saw at that when that unfolded was, one, the left came out with all of their daggers and rhetoric, and they vilified every single person who signed the petition. In fact, that petition was doxed, the people on that petition publicly, right? And so there were attempts by the left to cancel the lawyers who signed that petition by threat of not using services, etc.
Can I just mention the irony behind that too? Because the thing is, if you're a professional and you're a member of any kind of an organization, if you want to sign a petition, don't you have to be a valid member, like an active member who's in good standing? So
yeah, you do.
Because I just want to point that out, because when they doxed that list of 50 lawyers, it's funny because we had all taken the training. We'd all taken the mandatory training. It was 6 hours of Indigenous cultural training. And just to make it clear for the viewers too, it wasn't just about the cultural. This is the Law Society's ability to mandate us on any topic, any means, any manner, whatever they like in terms of education. So this is not to say you have to take these legal courses so you're competent. This is about taking cultural competency, which was 6 hours of their opinions of Indigenous cultural whatever. So the thing is, the bottom line here is that they were coming out and giving the indication that all of these lawyers on this list were a bunch of racists. But in reality, every single one of them had taken the training. It was not about Indigenous cultural training. It was about
it wasn't about the course. It was
it was about communism, and it's about a law society who's prescribing an education for their lawyers, no different from communist China. And that's why hats off to Roger Song for bringing that judicial review and challenging that. Yeah.
What 100%. And just so everybody knows, like, look, for my entire career, of course, lawyers need to make sure that they're competent. I mean, that's, it's pretty standard. And part of that competency is knowing your practice well enough to understand that you need to be read up on case law. You need to understand various it's mostly case law, really, what it comes
and
down
legislation
to.
And changes.
And legislation, exactly. And that you understand what the law is and how it's being interpreted, et cetera, et cetera. And it's about, camaraderie within our profession as well, so that we have resources upon which to draw what's happening in different areas of the country, et cetera. But it was always up to us to determine our education path. Right. And so we had an obligation once a year that we had to explain what we did. So we read this book or wrote this paper or attended the seminar or this course. We did pro bono. These are the things that we did as part of our practice. And we had to do that every year. And then we had to do a review the following year of, okay, well, how did that kind of go? And did you get everything done on your list that you thought you were going to get done? And have that reflection. And now the Law Society has spent, I don't know how many thousands of dollars on revamping the system to create this, I don't even know what it is.
Mandatory education system.
Well, it's the mandatory education system, but it's also what's creeped into all of the Law Society right now is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that is the kind of like the base that's underpinning all of how the Law Society views everything. And so I mean, it was funny because we had just had the vote where just over 800 lawyers out of, I think, like 3,500 lawyers showed up at that meeting. It was a Zoom meeting. So about 25% of the population voted in favor of the motion to repeal the rule. And then shortly thereafter, the Canadian Bar Association came out, stating that they were looking at implementing a course on transgender issues. So, this is like the nonstop. And Roger Song, who grew up as part of the Cultural Revolution, and I've talked about this case in another podcast. I had Glenn Blackett on last week with the JCCF, Justice Center for Constitutional Freedom, and he's representing Roger Song. And Roger's very clear in this, and we bring up legitimate points. We push back about the rule of law. We explain our position as coherently as possible in letters to the Law Society, and we've done so in the Council of Alberta Lawyers that Lani and I sit on, and I believe Doris is probably a part of as well. We try to hold the Law Society to task, and we send, like, I think one of the letters we sent was like 10 pages long. We sent it to the Premier. We sent it, and the response back that we got from the Law Society was, "Thank you. Acknowledge receipt." Right? Oh, no, like, you have a huge constituent of lawyers. I'm going to say probably about 25% of the lawyers, maybe more, because a lot of people simply are either they're disengaged for whatever reason, because that's what most of our society is disengaged about most things. So lawyers would be no different, and or are too afraid to come forward and say something because of what is happening to lawyers like Doris and other lawyers that I know who have received complaints for representing people on the wrong side of the issue. And notwithstanding that, they don't care. It's like, it's like Justin Trudeau not wanting to meet with the truckers. It's a pattern of, we are just going to do whatever it is that we want to do, and we don't care about what you, as a member of, I pay fees to the Law Society. We all pay fees to the Law Society. They work for us, actually. So everything has been turned upside down, right? And we can't even get the courtesy of a more thoughtful response, or even an offer to sit down and meet.
That would be nice. And the question I have is, what is your obligation as a professional if you believe the governing body perhaps is not holding up the rule of law? Maybe they misunderstand it. Maybe they're misapplying it. It's always possible when it comes to the law. But what is a professional's obligation? Are we supposed to sit back and be quiet? Or are we supposed to actually speak up and advocate for people? Because that's what I understood my oath to represent.
Well, it is. And that's why, and I think that's why, we get along so well, the three of us, because we believe that, right? And we understand that. And but many people don't. And so, but, I think it's important to get this information out. But Doris's story doesn't end just at the Law Society. Take a listen to what Doris has been going through. So I met Doris at a rally in Calgary in 2020, and I was so excited that I saw another lawyer. She spoke at that rally, and I was so excited. I went over and I grabbed her, and I was like, I can't believe it. Thank you for doing what you're doing. And because I had been going around the city of Calgary trying to find the rallies, and I'm thinking to myself, where are all the lawyers? Like, what's going on here? you know? And so Doris shows up. That's how we met. But explain what you've been dealing with from the follow-up from that.
Yeah, that was quite an amazing meeting there, Catherine. So yeah, anyway, I believe it was sometime in November of 2020. So I apparently, and it was unbeknownst to me up until a couple of years ago, actually, and it was when I came through the Canada-US border and was driving, because that was when certain people were not allowed to fly, kind of thing. Anyway, so came through the border, and I was told at that point by a border agent that there was a warrant for my arrest. To my surprise, I didn't get any other details. It happened actually the next year again, and by that time I was like, yeah, I know about it. And he's like, well, it's under the Public Health Act, and we don't do anything about it. So nothing was done about this arrest warrant up until December 2023. It was the first time that I flew out of the country. So out of the Calgary airport. So, and I kind of thought that it was all, like, that nothing was going to happen with it because, I'd had a few minor, you know, appearances, I guess, or confrontations with the police, just with a minor fender bender, getting like a, what do you call them, a damage sticker or something like that. So I was in a police station after that, and it was never brought up.
Nobody ever, you had never received any, nobody was served you with anything?
Never.
Nothing.
I had never seen a police officer, not at that rally, never, about anything with Public Health Act, and I never received any ticket. So anyway, here I go to fly out to Phoenix in December of 2023. And I go through, so first of all, I go through the humiliation ritual at the security, where you take off your boots and then they pat you down because you're not going to go through the radiation machine and all that. So anyway, I make it through that. Then I'm at the U.S. Customs booth, and it was a little bit weird because he's like taking my fingerprints, right? And I'm like, okay, this is a little weird. Anyways, and then this other agent comes out of the back and he's like, I need to talk to you. So I'm like, okay. And I kind of knew because I knew that there was this thing out there, but I actually thought that they were probably going to help me, naively help me sort of just get rid of this thing because I knew it was super old. And the other thing is I knew that it was under those Public Health Acts, which we had the Ingram case, right? Where we actually had a justice say that they were invalid. So not that they ever were valid, even without that, whatever. But that aside, we've had these CMH orders looked at by a judge and they've been declared invalid. So I'm like, whatever, this is not gonna, continue. Okay, so I go into this back room at the Calgary airport and the border agent is like, well, we're gonna have a police officer come and see you and then you'll be off and on your way. Just a little bit of paperwork and you'll be off and on your way. And he's like, just go wait over there. So I go to wait. And then about 15, 20 minutes later, this police officer comes towards me and he's like, there's 2 warrants for your arrest. And I'm like quite taken aback because, all I knew about was this sort of one little thing. And then
a ticket. It was a CMOH, some sort of ticket.
Yeah, something like that. And then he's like, you're under arrest. And I'm like, holy moly, right? Like, this is not good. So you can just imagine, I've been a rule follower all my life, really. I generally, I'm a good person. I try to do good and stuff like that. So to actually have that happen was really shocking, and your mind just starts racing and that kind of thing. And anyway, so then he does explain that it's like that I was in a group of more than 15 people and I was without a face covering. So those were supposedly the 2 warrants. I'm like, well, they're on the same day anyway, whatever. We didn't argue about it. He just clarified that that's what it was. And then he read me my rights, and you're like, your mind is really racing, right? And he reads me my rights, and then he's like, do you understand? This is sort of standard, a standard thing that the officers go through, I guess, when they're arresting you. And I refuse to tell him that I understand, because understand actually means that I'm standing under his authority. So I wouldn't admit that I stand under him, right? He's my fellow man. So he was quite flustered. And then he said, let me read this to you slowly. So he's like, you have a right to a lawyer. Do you know what a lawyer is? And I didn't want to tell him. And so I'm like, I refuse to answer his questions, right? So that's kind of just how it went. And then I refused to answer really anything that he asked me. And he was actually he was so flustered. He's like, do you speak English? And then he's like, oh, of course you do. Like, so anyway, then he gives me this appearance notice and he opens the door and off I go. But I could tell, like he was pretty like, what was that? Right. Anyway, the fact of the matter is I got arrested at a Calgary airport, which is absolutely ridiculous, on a public health order. So the gist of the story is yeah, you know what? We've had some good decisions out there, like the Mosley one with the emergencies invocation being declared improper, all that kind of thing. But all this stuff is still going on, and everyone's affected by this. It's not just me. Anyone who is speaking against the narrative or, you know, whatever, like your rights can be infringed at any moment. And it's, like I said, it's still happening. And I know, Lani, you're dealing with
Mhm.
Stacey's Happy Place. Like that's still ongoing.
Yep.
We've got, you
Yep.
might want to talk more about that. But
Yep.
I mean, it's just that we can't let our guard down. And we just have to be really aware that Canada's in a pretty dire state right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Isn't that the
serious.
truth?
Yeah.
Yeah, Lani, do you want to give a brief update before we wind
Yeah.
things down for
And I'll
today
try to
about
do it.
Stacey's Happy Place?
Yes, I'll try to do it with some humor, okay? So, last Thursday, and this tends to happen when there's activity on this case, but last Thursday, AHS went into Stacey's Happy Place again, and they brought the RCMP with them. And again, just for the viewers that aren't familiar, Stacey's Happy Place is a little store in Eckville, which has a population of about 1,100 people, almost 1,200, I think. And they sell coffee and they sell used books and some retail products, just trinkets, things like that. And so since COVID started, and that's, their business opened about 6 months prior to COVID starting. But they've had more than 30 AHS inspections, and we've gone through 3 public health appeal board hearings. We've lost them all. We've gone to judicial review, and we just got another judgment back. Now, just before the judgment comes back last Thursday, they go in there with the police. And this time the family took a bit of a different tactic. And it was like, I think we as Canadians, it's a big strategy when we see people who are not complying with the rule of law, and even if they are law enforcement, whoever they are, just stand as witness. So this family, they got their cell phones out and they recorded what was going on, and they recorded the worst allegation made towards them that day. And it was that they had a hard bar of soap, like a solid bar of soap by the sink, which had already been noted because one of the daughters has allergies to the pump soap, the soft soap, right? So they had permission to have it there, but of course, no, this is an allegation. So playing it smart, because the whole reason behind this case is just to show people what's happening. And they put it up, they put it online, and it was pretty amazing. I got to give the public some credit because by Friday, um, they had already, AHS had already posted an inspection report that was blank and it said they were closed. And then by the next day, Stacey noticed there was 165,000 views of this bar soap inspection. And I was actually at work that Sunday and I'm watching my Canada Polly, and I just love the guy. He's from Ontario. And all of a sudden I hear a voice I recognize and there's the video play. And I'm like, holy cow, this case is on his show too now. But I think the point is that, you do something like this, then you get all the views. Okay. And I want to say this is how the public and bearing witness to this conduct is so important. We got all those views. And then what do? They took down the closure notice. They did not close the store. They issued an inspection report that said that these were not critical violations. So I think the public has a big impact, but it now kind of explains all this conduct because we just got the decision and we haven't gone through it thoroughly yet. We just got it yesterday. But yeah, there was a loss again. So in this case, AHS used the inspection reports for this company to personally prosecute the owner. They walked them over to the Crown, gave a statement because the owner wasn't specifically referenced. This was her business, right? And then they used their inspections to deny her legal representation. So basically the same 2 AHS inspectors kept inspecting them over and over, and they were the same inspectors that were shutting them down, that were witnesses for the Crown, that were witnesses to take the food permit away, and ironically at the same time had their hat on in another boardroom demanding in-person meetings to get their food permit back. So it was complete capture. But so I can't really report on all the details yet, but I can just say the court didn't see that. So
Wow. Yeah. I think it's and this is why it's so important that we share these stories, I think, with the public, because as Doris said, I mean, this is still going on. And I mean, being arrested for CMOH violation, 3 years after the fact, considering that the court has already said that they were ultra vires, or they weren't legal effectively.
there's your elephant in the room.
Legislation.
Yeah. Like,
And-
how
and
can
then-
we do this when
And
they've
so
already
and so
said
what
this?
is what is Danielle Smith doing about this? I mean, here are these outstanding tickets that are not being dealt with, and in fact now people have to go through this headache of appearing in front of the judge, and also the shock and embarrassment. I mean, there's a pattern here with how deceiving these bodies and institutions are, right? They're not being transparent, and they're not doing what they need to do, and so to demonstrate that due process is being done, and it's still having a very large impact. And I think that's part of the psychological operation. Actually, I think it's designed that way because the more confusing you can make things and put people off their footing, I think the better. And I think that's part of what's going on here right now. But, and at the end of the day, everybody, we've heard for a long time, just hire a lawyer, sue them, just hire a lawyer and sue them, and everybody wants their day in court. And I'm like, don't go near them. I over the last 3.5 years, I've just completely lost faith in our own profession, and it's really sad because it's so our profession. I mean, I used to be very proud to be a lawyer, and and we go to school, and it's in many respects, I found when I was going through law school, like learning a different language, right? It's a different way of thinking about things and understanding the society around us. And right now, everything has been turned upside down, and we really can't look to these organizations, these institutions, these governments to fix the mess that they're causing. And this is what's happening in our society right now, is that it's next to impossible to get justice within the system that's actually acting in an unjust way. Like, so
if you can even access it, right?
If you can even access it.
Yeah.
And then you're spending, tens of thousands of dollars, in family law cases, or, more money in bigger litigation.
Yeah.
That people don't have. People don't have this type of money, and lawyers shouldn't be doing all of the work for pro bono, because we need to eat too. And, and there's this weird, so really the message that I want to leave people is that the only true savior in any of this is you. It's me as an individual. It's us as individuals. And we have that responsibility to conduct ourselves, I believe, in a manner that, if your values are that you believe in the supremacy of God and the rule of law, if you believe in certain principles, it's up to you to stand up for your rights to do it on an individual basis. And that means in all things. And that's really challenging, because all things means your employer. It means the supermarket. I mean, every time I go into the supermarket now, when they ask me if I want a bag, and I say, well, no, I'm not paying for a bag. And isn't it interesting that all of the stuff I have on the conveyor belt is in a plastic bag, and yet you won't let me have a plastic bag?
Eat your paper
And
straw.
yeah, or now in the city of Calgary, it's ridiculous because they have this stupid bylaw that's still in effect where you can't even get fast food without, they asked me if I'd like to buy a bag for 15 cents. And I'm like, no, I wouldn't like to buy a bag for 15 cents. And so then they're like shoving your French fries through the drive-through window without a bag.
Isn't the law supposed to represent the will of the people, though? Isn't it? We've drifted so far away. Yeah.
The people haven't been engaged, and they need to, because
Mhm.
going back to the arrest, I think, like, I look at the officer and I'm like, this guy could be my neighbor. Like, he's arresting someone. He knows what the offense is, which is like
Mhm.
being in a gathering of more than 15 people. Like, he should have been like, you know what? I'm not doing this. I know I
Mhm.
have to do it as a part of my job, but he should have been like, you know what? It doesn't matter that this is part of my job. I'm not doing it. And he didn't. He just followed
Yeah.
orders, didn't even probably think about it, didn't care. And you know
Mhm.
what?
We're all suffering as a
We're all
result.
suffering.
Mhm.
We're all suffering. And the longer this goes on, the longer we allow this to go on, the more we're going to suffer.
Stand in your truth. Ha! I got to say it. But
Yeah,
it's true.
well, yeah,
It's true. If and that was the whole point behind posting that video. Stacey's family there with the inspection, because you know what? Yes, that's your neighbor. He's an AHS inspector, and that's what he does to people when he leaves the home. Because I have to be accountable for myself as a professional, as a mother, as a wife, as a neighbor. Why don't we all have to be professionals and in every respect in that regard? I just don't understand. I don't
well,
understand that we be so
responsibility,
selective.
like, I mean, responsibility is different than I would think. I see responsibility as a virtue, right? Like it's like it is the thing that underpins our obligations and duties, right? And I think it's a moral responsibility that we have in how we show up in all aspects of our life. And we've really lost that, I think, by and large, collectively, because when we're so disengaged, I mean, we're basically debt slaves, trying to keep up with the Joneses, and then we're fed in, toxic food that, I mean, I just saw on Facebook or something today where this person put a McDonald's time capsule together with fries and a burger, and it was
Oh,
sitting in a bag, like from like 1996 or something like that. And she took it out and it looked exactly the same. You went like no mold, no nothing, right? Like it hasn't deteriorated whatsoever, right? So, and so, and I'm talking with my daughter today on the way home, and she's noting, like, I'm proud of her for this, like how everybody's falling for this the convenience argument, right? Like it's so convenient, right? Like, isn't it great? I can just microchip my hand and then wave the door to the pop machine and it spits out a pop or something ridiculous, right?
yeah.
Like this is how we're being sold it. We're being dumbed down. We're being complacent and lazy, and they're providing us as many resources and opportunity to foster that sort of disengagement from reality and from society.
Hmm. Yeah. And then you're really shamed if you speak out against it. Like, look at the process being the punishment. That's where it ends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you know what? We persevere one foot in front of the other, right? And I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And I don't know, like Justin Trudeau is like Teflon. I mean, I don't know how many scandals have come out, one right after another in rapid fire. And it seems like, the population is just satisfied with, no, we didn't do it, right? Even though you have the documents in front of you, or they can just say that no, it's not even disagreeing. It's just that they'll just outright deny, even in the face of the truth, staring them right in the face and being printed in black and white. And so it's now time, I think, that we really need to come together. We need to assess ourselves personally and how we show up in our world. And I hope that we can inspire people to be bold. And that's what I know that's what Lawyers for Truth did, because I know, Doris, that you helped so many people navigate the mask exemption. And we all work together on promoting that message to Albertans and across Canada. But when you're now being when you're now being persecuted for advocating for your client, even in the face of these CMOH orders that are now found to be illegal, the Law Society is still pursuing you. And not only that, they're actually, they're going to make an example out of you, I think, because this is ridiculous. They're having a 2-week hearing for something that you've already admitted you've done.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I wanted to add to that, the Law Society, made us keep it private and confidential up until recently when they issued the citation. They made it public. And they actually, so now I actually was getting some emails from others, they knew about it, right? And so I'm like, geez, how do they know? So I put my name in Google, and it's actually like the second thing is like the Law Society citation. So they've actually defamed me as well. So their citation says that I issued misleading mask exemptions, which is absolutely ridiculous. So they have no shame or no.
They've published the verdict before they've even had the hearing. So she's guilty before she's even had a chance to.
Right.
And they still don't have the Section 59 notice. Like, I can't.
Right.
The legislation is the gateway to the power. You have to comply with that if you want to use the power behind it.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they're just running roughshod over their statutory obligations.
Yeah.
Well, ladies, thank
Okay.
you so much for coming on today. And Lani, like, I just wish Stacey and her family and what you guys are doing. I mean, what you're doing for that family is amazing. I know you're doing all of this pro bono, and I know that I appreciate that you've shared this case with Albertans, that they understand kind of the rot that we're dealing with in AHS and within government. And then, Doris, thank you so much for sharing your story about what's happening, and the reminder for all of us that this continues, this persecution continues. But let's just continue to shine the light onto this darkness. And I do believe in the end that we will be triumphant and we will be vindicated. But until then, everybody, please just know what's happening behind the scenes to everyday Canadians and Albertans. And let's hope that, let's hope that, that was my husband. Let's hope that we can start shift the zeitgeist of society, so that we can encourage people to be more of a participant in their life rather than a spectator.
Well said. Yeah.
It's so
Thank you,
honored to be
Catherine.
part of this fight with the both of you. Thank you,
Yeah.
Catherine, for
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. And thanks to the public too. There's been a lot of positivity out there, and it makes a difference, a huge difference. So,
yeah. Thanks again, ladies. And to everybody, good night. And I'm working on some other podcasts to be brought to you in the next few weeks. So stay tuned to the Responsibility Quotient podcast. And if you have any comments or would like to see other episodes, I'm on Rumble under Responsibility Quotient. You can find me also on X on my personal account, and on Facebook as well. So I look forward to your comments. And if you like what you see with the Responsibility Quotient podcast, please like and subscribe to Rumble as well. Thanks, everyone, and have a good night.